Hi, I'm Samantha Baldwin. Please subscribe to my channel and hit the notification button. This video is about how two police officers at the Rochdale branch of Greater Manchester Police protected my son's abusers, ignored my then 3 and 7-year-old sons, and placed me and my family in further danger. I cannot name these two police officers, a man and a woman. The man is a detective constable, who I refer to in this video as DCW. He has since been promoted to a detective sergeant. The woman, a detective inspector, I will refer to as DIW in this video. If there are any police whistleblowers within Greater Manchester Police or any witnesses who want to come forward, please email me through my website, which I will put in the description below, and you'll be treated with total confidentiality. When my sons disclosed horrific abuse by their father and many others, we reported it to Greater Manchester Police. Instead of thoroughly investigating and protecting, further down the line they assisted my ex-husband in the family court in breaking our family apart and helping the abusers. 2 members of the Rochdale branch of Greater Manchester Police refused to investigate, consistently lied, protected the father, called us fantasists, ignored key evidence and ignored the boys' disclosures. My sons have named many people. I have given these names to the police, social services and many other organisations and people. Instead of protecting us, the police have put mine and my family's lives at risk. The police to date have only protected my son's main abuser, their father, and every other person involved in this paedophile ring. Here is a timeline of what happened with the police. My eldest son disclosed abuse by his father on the 2nd of December 2014. After speaking to the NSPCC for advice, we reported this to the police on the 9th of December 2014. My eldest son was interviewed the following day. There was no rapport building, no getting to know the interviewing officer, and no child psychologist present. My traumatised 7-year-old son was told, "I am not here to be your friend," by a cold, abrupt policewoman. My husband was arrested and questioned by Detective Constable W that evening. When I watched the interview over a year later, I could see that it was more like a cosy chat than a proper police interview. My husband spent most of the interview trying to blame my son and me. He said to the police officer about my son, "You can tell there's something wrong with him." And then he tried to shift the blame onto me. The police didn't search his house, they simply asked for him to hand over his devices. He handed over his phone and one of his laptops. He had another laptop that he failed to hand in. I believe that if the police had carried out a full house search, then they would have found sufficient evidence that would have proved the sexual abuse and drugging of my sons. On the 11th of December 2014, DCW, who interviewed my husband, came to visit me with an update following on from my husband's arrest. He said that he knew what a paedophile looks like and that my ex-husband wasn't one. He described my husband as an impeccable character that would stand up well in court and that fathers have rights, and made inappropriate comments such as that I reminded him of his ex-wife. He also suggested that my boys hadn't been abused, but it was instead a reaction to the separation between my husband and I. Me and my husband had been separated for 3.5 years at that point. The police officer gave the overall impression that he had been taken in by my husband. When I questioned him over an address that my husband would regularly attend, sometimes twice a day, he confirmed that it was a known address. He said that it would not matter if a paedophile or drug dealer lived at that known address and that it didn't prove that my husband was a paedophile. I complained about DCW to his boss, Detective Inspector W. She said that she would be assigning someone else onto the case and that they would contact me within the next few days. I didn't hear anything. And in the meantime, my son's disclosures were becoming even more serious and disturbing. More abusers were named, including paternal grandparents. My youngest son described being held underwater, fully clothed by his father, until he lost consciousness. He also made disclosures of being orally raped by his father and the man who lived with his father, who was never arrested. By the 3rd week of December, my eldest son started to disclose that Daddy had injected him many times, even describing the fineness of the needle. On the 31st of December, I went to my GP as I still hadn't yet heard anything from the police, and I wanted to book a sexual health chat for my sons, as we hadn't been offered one. What I didn't realise at the time is that they should be carried out within 2 weeks at the latest. As a result of my GP contacting social services, that evening I was visited by a policewoman. She talked to my eldest son on his own. Arrests were made the following morning of 2 men, and cautions made to my mother-in-law and father-in-law in Devon. My eldest son also told the policewoman about the injections. She said that the doctor at the health check would take hair samples and then send them back to the police forensics department to analyse for drugs. Hair samples were taken on the 6th of January 2015. My eldest son was externally examined. My youngest son wasn't examined at all as he refused to have his trousers taken off. It later transpired that DCW had lied to the doctor at the hospital based on what one of the alleged abusers had said in his police interview, whereby he said that it was 3, 4 or 5 years since he last saw the boys, taking into account that my youngest son was only 3 years old at the time. And yet, interestingly, his husband said that it had only been a few months since they had last seen the boys. Based upon DCW's lies, the doctor also tried to dissuade me from having the hair samples taken for drug testing, but she did take them. A pencil-sized thickness of hair was cut close to the scalp in both of my sons and placed into sealed bags. My youngest son was interviewed at the end of January 2015, and my eldest son was interviewed for the second time at the end of January. I only saw their interviews over a year later. In his second interview, my eldest son gave very clear and descriptive evidence about his father injecting him with a very fine needle that felt like a mosquito bite. He slumped down on the sofa to describe the effect that it had on him, and said that his father and his father's housemate would go into the loft for the injections. In spite of this clear evidence by my eldest child, unfortunately, the police refused to test the hair. A family member telephoned DIW to ask about the drug results. She yelled down the phone and refused to meet us. She said she would not investigate any of my son's disclosures if they hadn't been sent to the police. She yelled that it was fantasy and ridiculous, that there were lots of men involved, and injections. And this is Rochdale Police, where lessons had apparently been learned in the grooming scandal, where children were ignored, called fantasies, and were drugged and raped by many men. Yet my young children were dismissed as fantasies that same year. The disclosures became worse and worse. It was now clear that this was a large paedophile ring, and that this wasn't just sexual abuse, it was also physical and psychological abuse. I went to see my MP at the time, Simon Danchuk, due to the inaction and lack of investigation by the police. He was initially seemingly very concerned and helpful, and he said, "When will the police learn?" He wrote to the then Chief Constable of Greater Manchester Police, Sir Peter Fay, and on a second visit we updated him with increasingly disturbing disclosures. He commented that it sounded like a cult, and he said that he would go and see the Chief Superintendent of Rochdale, Chris Sykes. In retrospect, I wonder why I wasn't also invited to that meeting. Then the sergeant from that department came to visit. After Simon Danchuk had updated them with the disclosures, I gave her abuser names and a location of an office that my eldest son had mentioned where his father would take them to be abused on Saturday afternoons. She was uninterested. She didn't take any notes. She refused to have the CCTV checked outside the offices. The only name she took down was one of the abusers because his brother had been previously convicted for the rape and attempted murder of his wife. I arranged to see Simon Danchuk again, but he told me not to attend the meeting, saying that Rochdale police were doing all they can. There was a complete change in him. He literally went cold on us and a wall was effectively put up. And I still haven't got to the bottom of this. I later discovered that he had a very close connection with Rochdale care home provider Jonathan Rigg. Danchuk even praised Rigg in Parliament for his care homes. There is also a link between my ex-husband and Rigg. My ex-husband rented a large property to Rigg for one of his many care homes for vulnerable children and teenagers in the Rochdale area. Me and my family moved areas when it was clear that this was a large paedophile ring and the police were not investigating or doing anything. Family court proceedings started at the end of 2015 when my ex-husband was released from the police bail conditions. At the beginning of 2016, I heard about the independent inquiry into child sex abuse, who were looking at historical cases of institutional failures concerning child abuse. I called them and they put me in touch with a detective chief inspector from GMP. This police officer agreed to test in the boy's hair when I informed him that the hair samples did meet with the requirements of testing. The hair samples had been sat there in the forensic department since the beginning of 2015 when the samples were originally taken. A few weeks later we got the results. The hair samples were positive for a number of sedatives, one of which was zolpidem, the current date rape drug of choice, as it is difficult to detect in the hair if there have only been small doses. The drugs were in all sections of the hair samples from root to tip. To my dismay, I discovered that DCW, the one that I complained about, was still involved in the case. Upon reading the lab reports of the drugs found in my son's hair, there was a summary and background to the case. The laboratory stated that DCW told them that the last contact between the father and my sons was August 2014. This was a total fabrication. It was the 1st of December 2014 when he last saw them. Even my ex-husband said this. DCW was deliberately trying to cover up for the father by lying. There is proof that the father's contact with my sons was consistently a few times a week, right up until the day before my eldest son's first disclosure on the 2nd of December 2014. Furthermore, when I had sight of the full police disclosure, I saw an email from DCW to the detective chief inspector when forwarding the drug results saying, "Boss, copies of the hair report for your information. Don't think this changes a great deal, but she will make a great deal of the results," she being me. How on earth could he say that evidence of drugs, of my sons being drugged, wasn't a big deal? Also in the police disclosure were minutes taken of meetings where DCW commented that he believed that the father was innocent, therefore negatively influencing everyone who would attend the meeting. One of the most concerning things were the emails between DIW and the forensic expert at the police when asking about the requirements of a hair sample. So this was beginning of 2015. So these were the requirements of a hair sample in relation to drugging. In an email from the forensic expert to DIW, we would need about 4 weeks worth of hair growth and a pencil-sized thickness amount taken from the root and measuring about 4 to 5 centimetres long. A period of 4 weeks must pass between the drug being administered and the hair sample being taken in order to allow for hair growth, as it is within the new hair growth that the drug can be detected. Beyond that 4-week growth period, the chances of detecting a one-off dose will begin to decrease. Regular drug use can still be detected. The length of the hair will need to be appropriate to the time period you need to analyse for. Hair grows at a rate of 1 centimetre per month. So, if you wish to determine whether the individual was taking drugs 6 months ago, the hair would need to be 6 centimetres long. So the hair sample did meet with the requirements. It had been 5 weeks since the last contact with the father, so any drugs would have emerged from the root into the hair shaft. They stated that 1 centimetre equals to 1 month of hair growth. My son's hair samples measured 7 centimetres and 5.5 centimetres, therefore equating to approximately 7 months of hair growth from June to November 2014 and 5.5 months of hair growth from July to November 2014. This also entirely disproves the judge's findings that my sons were drugged sometime around the mid to the end of December 2014. That is impossible. DIW refused to test my son's hair for drugs at the beginning of 2015. In her statement to the family court on the 9th of August 2016, she stated, "The reasons it was not sent off is because we received advice that without the root and given the length of time that had passed, the results would not be reliable." The cost was also an added issue, and upon advice it did not receive authorisation to be tested. It doesn't say that the root needs to be pulled out. The hair is cut with scissors as close to the scalp as possible. Is this corruption or negligence? And this is what I've been dealing with. I also read in the police disclosure that the only reason that our case was sent to the CPS was to offer further protection to the father and because this family had a history of complaining. The DC and the DI both appeared as witnesses in family court to support the father. I was horrified to see a number of lies in the DC's statement. The lies about when the father last saw my sons to try and stop the hair from being tested and sabotage the investigation and negatively influence every single professional he was involved with within the case. Nursery workers, social workers, doctors, and now the family court. I was equally as horrified to read the DI's damning comments in her statement. She stated that the boys became confused about what was real and what wasn't real. She stated that my eldest son had only disclosed as he was rewarded with his great-granddad's war medals after his first disclosure, and that he continued to disclose to please us. She also said that she had never been as concerned about 2 children as she was with mine. She had never met any of us, including my sons. The DC also had never met my sons. The 2 police officers did their very best to destroy my sons' lives. I hope that one day they are exposed for what they did and how they abused their power as police officers to try and destroy my family. These 2 police officers later had a meeting with my estranged father. He told me that during the meeting the police told him that it was all a load of rubbish and none of it had happened. As soon as the judge made false findings against me that I had drugged my sons to set the father up, I had a polygraph test, which I also sent to DCW. He emailed back saying that he wasn't at all interested and that he would be destroying it. I have complained about these 2 police officers, but the complaints are being totally ignored. Thanks for watching this video and please share.